Hey everybody, it's Emily at Homeschooling and welcome back to another Homeschool Tidbit. Welcome back to Build Your Library's Homeschool Tidbits. Today is episode 14 and I'm going to be talking about what I wish I'd known as a new homeschooling mother. In this weekly video series, I will delve briefly into a topic related to homeschooling, and I'll share some of my knowledge and expertise as a longtime homeschooling mother of 4 children, 3 of whom have graduated. I began homeschooling my children back when my oldest daughter was 4. She's now 23 and she'll be graduating from college in about 3 weeks. Back in the early 2000s, secular homeschooling content was not easy to find and basically non-existent. This was before Instagram started to give you unrealistic expectations about the perfect homeschooling family, though there were still plenty of message boards back then to make you feel like you weren't doing enough. And it also seemed that only very religious Christians were homeschooling. Really, my only prior experience before I started homeschooling consisted of one single family that lived down the street from my grandparents. And I remember thinking they were so weird because they didn't watch TV, and the S word that they were shocked by was actually the word stupid. It would be years before I felt like I knew what I was doing. But I've learned a lot in these last 20 years, so I wanted to share with you guys some things that I wish I had known when we first started homeschooling. Because, you know, why didn't anyone tell me this stuff? They should have. So first up, academics can wait. That's right, I'm getting controversial with my very first tip. But seriously, there are so many schools of thought on this one, and obviously you know your children best. But if your 6-year-old is struggling with basic math concepts or not grasping phonics, just put it aside for a few months. They are still so very young, and there's more than enough time to cover that material. I see so many new homeschoolers trying to cover so many subjects with their 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, and guys, it's not necessary. All you're going to accomplish with this is burnout, both for you and your children. Tip number 2, if it isn't working, ditch it. In your first few years, you're figuring out your groove. What kind of homeschooling philosophy do you feel works best for your family? How do your children learn best? There is a ton of amazing curricula on the market today, and you're going to want to use everything. But don't feel like you have to keep plugging away at a program that isn't working for you and your children. You are their teacher and you are in charge of your homeschool, not the curriculum. Even if it's popular, even if everyone else seems to love it, if it's not working for your children, move on to something that does. This can be especially difficult when you feel like you've spent a lot of money. But remember, the resale market is huge. If possible, sell that expensive curricula and let somebody else use it who is hopefully going to get more out of it than you did. Tip number 3, don't compare your children to someone else. This one is hard because we all want a benchmark that we can make sure our children are doing well. But comparing children is just not the way to do it. Every child is different and learns at their own pace. I say this a lot, I know, but it really does bear repeating. It's so easy to look at your friends' children or the prodigy who lives next door or even your other children and get caught up in the worry that you aren't doing enough or that they're behind. They aren't. They're just going at their own pace. Some kids are early readers and some don't quite get it to click until they're 9 or 10. One of your children might be great at math and another better at writing. Everyone's different, and that is okay. Not to mention how absolutely damaging it can be to your children to hear you saying that so-and-so is already in the next math level. What's your problem? Why can't you do that? Even if you don't say it to them directly. Children have large ears, and they will hear you say it, and it will stick with them. As long as they're progressing, I promise, they're going to be fine. Put on your blinders, focus on your own child, and don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Tip number 4, there are different ways to homeschool and all of them are valid. There are so many different ways to homeschool. You can be an unschooler. You can do school at home. You can follow the Charlotte Mason philosophy. There's Waldorf, Montessori, classical. The list goes on and on. But the key factor to remember here is that once you figure out what works best for you and your children, stick with it. Hone in on that and do not worry about what anyone else is doing. I initially spent several years dabbling back and forth between every kind of homeschool philosophy I could find. It was exhausting and frustrating for all of us. And then I still ended up back where I started with the Charlotte Mason philosophy. I wish someone had just told me that I didn't need to do all of that. I wish someone had told me that my way was actually valid. I didn't need to think that I had to try what everyone else is doing to see if I was going to get better results. If your children love workbooks, don't feel like you can't let them use them because it doesn't align with the Charlotte Mason philosophy. It always comes down to figuring out what works best for your family and your children and sticking with that. Flexibility is homeschooling's best feature. You can be eclectic and do different things. You can take what works from each philosophy and blend that all together into something that is just for you and your children. Tip number 5. You don't need a dedicated schoolroom. Instagram is full of gorgeously organized homeschool rooms, isn't it? Ugh, it makes you just want to create that space in your own home, but you know what? You don't need it. It's not necessary. I spent years coveting a beautiful homeschooling space, and then I tried to make that happen. I tried to make it work in my basement, and that was a disaster. I tried turning my dining space into a homeschool room, and it kind of worked a little bit. It was fine. But you know what seems to always work best for us is working together on the couch. I finally let go of this desire to have a beautiful homeschooling room. It allowed me to have more freedom in where we do our schoolwork and how I store our materials. And it also keeps me from wasting countless hours trying to organize and reorganize our space. I know what works best for us in our small home, and I can make the most of what I have. Not only that, but learning happens everywhere. Maybe you take your learning on the road and as you travel to activities and appointments. Perhaps sometimes you pack up your work and go to the park when the weather's nice. Or maybe you like to scatter around the house where everyone can work where they're the most comfortable. Backyard field trip, anyone? Go for it. And now for a final bonus lesson. Homeschooling is hard. I do think I knew this going in the beginning, but I was also very much unaware of just the sheer number of difficulties I would be facing over the many years of homeschooling. I mean, homeschooling a 4-year-old or even a 6-year-old is very different from homeschooling a high schooler. And homeschooling 3 kids when you have a brand new baby is even harder than that. Especially if you're brand new to homeschooling, all of this can feel overwhelmingly difficult. And you're going to have to let go of things, like having a spotless house or free time. You are going to have to make a lot of decisions. Some of them are going to be really difficult. Have you figured out your state's laws and stayed on top of what's required of you? Can you ignore those people in your life who think you're doing something wrong by teaching your children? Are you ready to deal with that moment when your children tell you they hate homeschooling and wish they could just go to real school because they watched a show on TV where school looked so super fun? The answer is, or will be, a resounding yes. You can do all of that. There will be a lot of challenges ahead that you can't even imagine when you're just starting out. But know that you love your children best. And you can totally rock this. Even when it's hard. Even when you want to quit, you got this. And your children might even thank you someday. Maybe. Someday. If you found this video helpful, I hope you'll check out Build Your Library curriculum. Build Your Library is a secular, literature-rich homeschool curriculum inspired by Charlotte Mason's philosophy of education. Based on 20 years of homeschooling, I created the curriculum that I wish I'd had when I first started homeschooling my children. I have spent thousands of hours cultivating the best literature to enhance your children's studies. Our lesson plans make homeschooling simple. Just open the lesson plans, gather your books, and go. Our easy-to-use lesson plans include everything that you need to homeschool. Just add math. Choose from our full-year K-12 levels, as well as our fun topical unit studies. With Build Your Library, you will cultivate a home library filled with captivating literature and raise children who become lifelong learners. So snuggle up with our lesson plans and a good book or three and have your best homeschool year ever. I hope you found this tidbit helpful. Come back next week and I'll be sharing more homeschool inspiration. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!